The chamber falls silent. Nigel Farage rises to his feet. And what happens next will send shockwaves through Westminster that nobody saw coming. 23 Labour MPs couldn't handle what was about to unfold. They literally walked out. Some say they were in tears. This wasn't just another parliamentary debate. This was a political massacre, and you need to hear every single word of what went down. The date will be remembered in British political history. Parliament was packed, the benches were full. Labour MPs sat confidently thinking they had everything under control. Sir Keir Starmer stood at the dispatch box defending his government's record with that calm, calculated demeanour he's famous for. He spoke about progress, about change, about the future of Britain. The Labour backbenchers nodded along. Some even cheered. They thought they were winning. They thought the public was buying it. They had no idea what was coming. Because sitting across from them, Nigel Farage was taking notes. His face was serious, concentrated. Anyone who knows Farage knows that look. It's the look he gets right before he destroys someone's entire argument in a matter of minutes. The look he had before his legendary debates on Brexit. The look that made him one of the most feared debaters in British politics. The Speaker called for questions. Several MPs stood up, asked their soft questions, got their soft answers. The usual parliamentary theatre. Labour MPs were relaxed now, some chatting amongst themselves, confident this was just another routine session. Then Farage stood up. The chamber noticed immediately. You could feel the temperature change. MPs on both sides straightened in their seats. The Labour front bench exchanged glances. They knew, everyone knew. When Nigel Farage stands up with that particular expression, someone is about to get absolutely demolished. The Speaker recognised him. The Honourable Member for Clacton. The chamber went quiet. Farage began slowly, methodically. He thanked the Speaker. He referenced Starmer's earlier comments. His tone was calm, almost casual. But anyone watching knew this was the setup. This was Farage building the foundation before he brought the entire house down. He started with immigration, the numbers that Labour promised versus the numbers that actually came through. Farage didn't shout. He didn't need to. He simply read the figures, the official statistics, Labour's own data, and with each number you could see Labour MPs shifting uncomfortably. Starmer's promise to reduce immigration had become a complete joke under the actual numbers. Farage laid it out, point by point, figure by figure. Then he moved to the economy. The growth projections Labour campaigned on versus the reality of what Britain was experiencing. The tax increases that Labour said wouldn't happen but absolutely did happen. The cost of living that was supposed to go down but kept climbing. Farage pulled out document after document, quote after quote. These weren't opinions. These weren't political spin. These were facts. Hard, undeniable, uncomfortable facts. And Starmer's face was starting to show it. That calm demeanour was cracking. But Farage wasn't done, not even close. He pivoted to energy policy, Labour's green agenda that was supposed to lower bills and create jobs. Farage broke down exactly what had happened instead. Energy bills soaring. Jobs being lost in traditional industries. Families choosing between heating and eating. And all while Labour ministers flew to climate conferences and posed for photographs. Farage's voice grew stronger now. The passion was building. He talked about the working class communities he'd visited, the people struggling to make ends meet, while politicians made promises they never intended to keep. Labour MPs were no longer chatting amongst themselves. Some were staring at the floor. Others were whispering urgently to colleagues. A few were shaking their heads, but you could tell they had no real response. Because everything Farage was saying was verifiable, everything was documented. There was no way to spin out of this. Then Farage went for the kill shot. He brought up Starmer's own record. His time as Director of Public Prosecutions, the decisions made, the cases handled, the promises given versus the actions taken. Farage didn't hold back. He methodically dismantled Starmer's carefully constructed public image piece by piece. Every contradiction, every flip-flop, every promise broken. The chamber was completely silent now except for Farage's voice. Even the usually rowdy backbenchers were stunned into silence. This wasn't just a political attack. This was a complete and total evisceration of everything Starmer and Labour had built their government on. And it was happening in real time, broadcast to the entire nation. Starmer stood there, his face getting redder. his jaw clenched. He tried to interject several times, but the speaker reminded him he would have his chance to respond. That chance was coming, but first he had to stand there and take every single blow Farage was delivering. The atmosphere in Parliament had shifted completely. What started as a routine session had transformed into something nobody expected. Farage continued his assault, and now he moved into NHS policy, Labour's crown jewel, the thing they always claim to protect better than anyone else. Farage pulled out the waiting list numbers, the A&E performance statistics, the staff shortage figures, all under Labour's watch, all getting worse, not better. He quoted Labour's manifesto promises word for word, then compared them to the actual reality on the ground. Nurses were leaving the profession, doctors were burning out, patients were waiting months for basic procedures. And what was Labour's response? More bureaucracy, more management layers, more diversity initiatives, while people literally died waiting for treatment. Farage's voice carried across the chamber with devastating precision. Each fact landed like a hammer blow. Labour MPs were looking increasingly desperate. Some were frantically scrolling through their phones, probably trying to find some counter-argument, some response they could use later. But Farage had done his homework. This wasn't a spontaneous rant. This was a carefully prepared, thoroughly researched demolition of Labour's entire governing record. And he was just getting warmed up. He shifted to education. Labour had promised to improve schools, to give every child the best possible start. Farage broke down what actually happened. Standards falling, discipline problems increasing, teachers drowning in paperwork while classroom sizes grew, kids leaving school without basic literacy and numeracy skills, the gap between private and state education widening, not narrowing. And all while Labour ministers sent their own children to expensive private schools while attacking those same schools publicly. The hypocrisy was staggering. Farage made sure everyone understood exactly how staggering it was. He named names. He cited specific examples. He left no room for doubt or deflection. Then something extraordinary started happening. Labour MPs began standing up and leaving the chamber. At first, it was just one or two, easy to dismiss as needing the bathroom or having other commitments. But then more followed. 3, 4, 5 MPs quietly getting up and walking out. The opposition benches noticed immediately. There were murmurs of disbelief. The speaker looked concerned. This was highly unusual. MPs don't just walk out during Prime Minister's questions, especially not government MPs, but they kept leaving. 6, 7, 8. Farage noticed too. He paused for just a moment, glanced at the exodus, and then there was the slightest hint of a smile. He continued, his voice even stronger now, because he knew what this meant. He was getting to them. The truth was so uncomfortable, so undeniable, that they literally couldn't sit there and listen to it anymore. They were running away, and everyone watching could see it. Farage pivoted to housing policy, another Labour promise that had turned into a complete disaster. They were supposed to build affordable homes. They were supposed to make housing accessible for young families. Instead, house prices continued to climb. Rents skyrocketed. Young people couldn't get on the housing ladder. And what did Labour do? They blamed everyone except themselves. They blamed landlords. They blamed developers. They blamed the previous government. They blamed global conditions. Anyone and everyone except the people actually in power making the decisions. Farage systematically destroyed each excuse. He showed how Labour's policies had actually made the problem worse. The regulations that increased costs, the taxes that discouraged building, the planning restrictions that created bottlenecks, all Labour policies, all making housing less affordable, not more. And still, more MPs were leaving. The count was up to 15 now. 15 Labour MPs who couldn't face what was happening. The remaining Labour MPs looked shell-shocked. Some were trying to appear defiant, arms crossed, staring straight ahead. But you could see it in their eyes. The panic, the realisation that they had no good response to any of this. Starmer remained standing, forced to endure every word. His earlier confidence had completely evaporated. He looked like a man who knew he was losing badly, but had no choice but to stand there and take it. Farage then addressed crime and policing. Labour had promised safer streets. They had promised to back the police and crack down on crime. The reality. Police numbers cut in many areas despite promises otherwise. Response times to crimes increasing. Certain crimes effectively decriminalised because the police didn't have resources to investigate. Communities feeling abandoned, and all while Labour politicians talked tough on social media but did nothing substantive in actual policy. Farage had the statistics ready. The crime rate changes, the prosecution rates, the conviction rates, all trending in the wrong direction under Labour's governance. He described specific cases, victims of crime who couldn't get justice, communities terrorised by antisocial behaviour while police forces were stretched impossibly thin. The chamber was in chaos now, but a quiet, stunned kind of chaos. The Labour benches were noticeably empty. 20 MPs had left, then 21, 22. The remaining MPs looked like they wanted to disappear into their seats. Some had their heads in their hands, others were staring blankly ahead, probably wondering how this had gone so catastrophically wrong. This was supposed to be a standard session. Instead, it had become a historic humiliation. Farage showed no signs of slowing down. If anything, he was gaining momentum. He moved to foreign policy next. Labour's confused, contradictory approach to international relations, their weakness on the world stage, the respect Britain had lost under Starmer's leadership. Farage detailed the diplomatic failures, the international meetings where Britain was sidelined, the trade deals that collapsed, the alliances that weakened, and through it all, Labour's insistence that everything was fine, that Britain was respected, that they were doing a great job. The delusion was extraordinary, and Farage made sure everyone understood just how extraordinary it was. He brought up specific interactions with world leaders, the awkward photographs, the failed negotiations, the promises made to international partners that Britain couldn't keep. Labour had made Britain look weak and unreliable. They had damaged relationships that took decades to build. And for what? For ideological commitments that made good social media posts, but terrible foreign policy. Farage's delivery was masterful. He knew exactly when to pause for effect, when to let a particularly damaging fact sink in, when to raise his voice for emphasis, and when to drop it for maximum impact. This was political theatre at its finest, except it wasn't theatre at all. It was real. Every word was backed by evidence. Every claim was verifiable. This was the truth, delivered with precision and force. And the truth was absolutely devastating to Labour. Then Farage did something that made the situation even worse for Labour. He started reading from the testimonials of ordinary British people, letters and messages from constituents across the country, not from his own constituency, but from Labour constituencies, from people who had voted Labour believing the promises, trusting the commitments, hoping for real change, and now they felt betrayed, utterly betrayed. Farage read their words slowly, carefully. A nurse from Manchester talking about working conditions that had gotten worse, not better. A teacher from Birmingham describing the chaos in schools as hers and the lack of support. A small business owner from Leeds explaining how Labour's policies were driving them to bankruptcy. A pensioner from Newcastle who could no longer afford to heat their home properly. A young couple from Bristol who had given up hope of ever owning a home. These weren't political activists. These weren't opposition supporters. These were all ordinary people whose lives had gotten harder under Labour. And their words, read in Farage's voice in that chamber, had more power than any statistics or policy analysis could ever have. You could see the impact on the remaining Labour MPs. Some looked genuinely distressed. These testimonials represented their constituents too. They knew the stories were true. They'd heard similar things in their own surgeries. They'd seen the problems in their own communities. But what could they say? How could they defend this? The answer was they couldn't. That's why 22 of their colleagues had already fled. And now, as Farage continued reading, a 23rd MP stood up and quietly left the chamber. 23 Labour MPs couldn't handle hearing the truth about their government's failures. 23 representatives of the people choosing to abandon their posts rather than face accountability. The symbolism was powerful, and everyone watching understood exactly what it meant. Farage paused after the 23rd MP left. He looked at the depleted Labour benches. Then he looked at Starmer and he asked the question that cut right to the heart of everything. Prime Minister, when are you going to stop making excuses and start actually governing? When are you going to put the British people first instead of your ideology? When are you going to keep even one of the promises you made? The chamber erupted, not in cheers or jeers, but in a kind of shocked acknowledgement that something significant had just happened. This wasn't the usual back and forth of parliamentary debate. This was a complete dismantling of a government's credibility. Starmer had to respond now. He had no choice. But what could he say? How do you respond when every single point made against you is factually accurate? How do you defend a record that speaks for itself in the worst possible way? Starmer rose to speak. His usual composure was gone. He looked tired, defensive, cornered. He started talking about the government he inherited, about the challenges they faced, about the difficult decisions they had to make. It was the same excuse playbook that Farage had just preemptively demolished, and everyone could see it. Even Starmer's own MPs, the ones who hadn't walked out, were struggling to look supportive.